All right, we are live for a Friday edition of the Mike and Mario Show, and excited to be back. Lots of things we're touching on, and yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, to say the least. But anyway, before we jump into it, Mario, how you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Mike. I hope you're doing well as well and preparing for the weekend.
Oh, definitely doing great. Excited. Got some activity for my child this weekend, so it should be fun. But I like to start off the weekend by just going through this past events for this week, and just continue to remind people the importance of bracing for impact while also preparing as best as they can in all the practical ways that they know how to do at this point. But before we move further, man, let's talk about. We, of course, we know about the obvious, the energy costs. We got Biden saying zero inflation and all that other stuff. We know what they're selling us, but let's focus on what's happening behind the scenes. And I think it has a lot to do with the continual uh, increase of partnerships and agreements done between China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, and how ultimately the dollar is going to be the most impacted by all these deals and whatnot. So we got a couple articles we're going to start off with, and then trickle into some of the more mainstream news. But based upon what you've been paying attention to, what are some things that really has caught your attention about what's developing out east?
Yes, I saw this article today about how Saudi Arabia and China are like ratcheting up their cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
and they've drawn up a memorandum of intent. I think it's memorandum of I forgot what it's called exactly, but they've come up with this agreement of how to cooperate
Mm-hmm.
in the energy sector, in petrochemicals,
Yeah.
and even some people even speculate in arms. And actually, Saudi Arabia has pledged to make sure that China is secure, has secure energy
Mm-hmm.
for not for the next 5 years, but for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So I think it's really significant. And what it shows to me is that Saudi Arabia is not like abandoning the West, but it's hedging its bets, I think, and it's ganging up or aligning itself to who they think are going to be the next big winners
Mm-hmm.
in the next 50 years, i.e., China and Russia. And as you said, I think that is another chink in the armor for the importance of the dollar as a reserve currency.
Yeah.
I would say that in 10 years, 15 years' time, these three countries, China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, probably won't be using the dollar amongst themselves. And that's
Right.
going to be highly significant. And you can add in some other countries, the global south as well. So I thought that was an interesting story.
Yeah, I agree. And so it just plays more into the de-dollarization process. Like, you as well as myself, we've been talking about this for quite some time now, and all the other things happening around us are geared towards distracting us from that major event. Like, this is that turning point in history where, we're going to look back in history books 5, 10, 20 years from now and see that all these events that are not being talked about by mainstream news sources are the catalysts that led to whatever the monetary system will have down that line. And by each deal, each contract signed, each handshake, to me, is definitely worth shining light on, just because it just shows more of how the world is moving away from the dollar-dominated petrodollar system, and it starts with these type of memorandums here. And so, for those that are tuning in, we have a couple more articles I'll touch on here, but just give you some of the key highlights from this article here. It just talked about a multi-pronged memorandum of understanding between Aramco and Sinopec lays a basis for increased cooperation. And then, of course, we're going to touch on more as to how the Eastern nations are pulling away from the West with the delisting of Sinopec from the New York Stock Exchange. So, which I'm assuming has a lot to do with this type of deal as well. And so, let's just move to the next article here if you want to. And so, there's a upcoming meeting. And so this is just a headline given to us from the West, but it says U.S. is not going anywhere. Middle East convoy says as China's Xi is expected to visit Saudi Arabia. And so we know that Biden took a trip over to Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago. And just from the information that we received, nothing productive came from that. I don't think that they decided to crank up the oil barrel or the oil allotment any more so than what the mainstream media was trying to tell us that they were, Biden was going to ask for. But then again, I'd assume when Xi Jinping leaves Saudi Arabia, more deals will be made that favors China rather than what Biden was able to do with the West. So, does this type of information surprise you whatsoever? How the China is going to be very favorable, I'm sure, with Saudi Arabia rather than the U.S.
No, it doesn't. And I think the fact that Biden and even Trump were really, well, Biden especially, he called, I don't know what he called the Saudi regime exactly, but it wasn't a very nice term.
Right. I
And I
couldn't live
think,
without it.
yeah, if we go back as well, about a year ago, we saw
Yeah.
that Russia is now has a military security agreement with Saudi Arabia, which is
Yeah.
the backbone of the Petrodollar agreement.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to see when she visits Saudi Arabia whether they are going to talk about security as well. And if he
Mm.
does, uh, I think that's highly significant as well.
Right, right. And I wouldn't be surprised if security does come up just because we know about last year how Russia and Saudi Arabia, and so this is an older article, but it just shows more of the cooperation between those nations. And so this took place on August 24th of last year, and it was definitely something that played into more of the de-dollarization talk when Saudi Arabia and Russia signed a deal to develop joint military cooperation. Now, I'm not too familiar. I haven't been paying attention to it in depth, but have they had any military exercises or anything like that you're familiar with or aware of?
I haven't really kept track of the cooperation between these two countries, but I just think it's significant that they made an agreement, and the fact that the Saudis feel like they're hedging their bets because the other thing I think that's happening is the West is trying to move away from so-called fossil fossil fuels
Yeah,
into green energy, and I think it's a big mistake. And eventually, that we'll have to go back to what they call fossil fuel, oil, and other derivatives of petroleum.
yeah,
So
and that's the thing. Like, it's amazing how all those Great Reset, New World Order type of activities is led by the East, and for the most part, it appeared as if China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia were going to jump on board with that. But then again, something happened within the last year or two where everybody decided to go their own way, and I think it has everything to do with the whole sanctions that's taking place on Russia, to where with
hmm,
China deciding to unload, or they've been unloading their U.S. liabilities for quite some time now, but they've gotten as low as I think they can because it's under 1,900,000,000,000 something billion dollars. But then again, Saudi Arabia, along with that, in that same time frame, they've been diversifying by helping out Russia and China, and of course with the OPEC plus, with Russia having a heavy influence on oil production, and on top of all the other things. So it's been a long time of setting up this stuff up, and it's starting to really show itself out. But we have another article here, which I think is also interesting, just to show you how more the cooperation has intensified under the radar amongst all the sanctions. It says China and Russia trade rose 29% in January to July as the nations maintain cooperation despite the sanctions. And so I think the next catalyst could ultimately be the whole Taiwan China situation. We'll see how that plays out. But the sanctions hasn't stopped China and Russia's cooperation whatsoever. It's only increased it. So I'm still anticipating between now and the end of the year some type of event where we're going to hear what their final decision will be in reference to how they're going to try to reframe the international, trade of some type. So we'll see. But is this surprising whatsoever to you?
no, especially with all the sanctions on Russia, they have to turn to China partly, and probably other countries that are not part of NATO, because they've lost out a lot of trade with the West, even though they do have exemptions in the sanctions.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we'll just touch on this last article here, which I think could ultimately be something that will hurt a lot of the companies here in the U.S. as well, just with the, as it says here, I'll put it up. It says Sinopec and PetroChina to delist from the New York Stock Exchange. And of course, there's a couple other companies as well that is also mentioned out there. But with these two major oil companies from China deciding to remove themselves from the U.S., that to me also furthers more of the separation from the West. Like it's literally time to remove our energy companies from this New York Stock Exchange because of, I guess, the whatever pending shift will take place. It won't be denominated in dollars, of course. And so this is maybe it might be surprise to us, but in reference to their long-term plan, I'm sure it's not. So
Yeah, I think it's a combination of two things. They're concerned if there's something with Taiwan, a conflict there, that they could do something to the shares issued in the NYSE, and
yeah,
the other, like you said, is a separation. We're getting a multipolar world,
yeah,
and I think that's the most important part of it. And the sanctions on Russia and the fact that
hmm,
China is now concerned because of Taiwan has just accelerated this multipolar move to a multipolar world.
yeah. And first, that's a bit so. Seeing the response by all the Western nations when the sanctions were first announced, led by the U.S., all of the stock market activity in the European Union as well as other exchanges were immediately frozen to where you couldn't get in and get out. It was like literally they cut off Russia companies off of all these other exchanges to where I'm thinking like obviously to me they're looking ahead to prevent that. So that plays right into what you're just saying. So they're doing it by them. They're doing it voluntarily before something hits the fan. So that could be an indicator to where within the next couple of weeks or a couple of months, in response to Pelosi having visited Taiwan, that could be them basically getting ready for some type of activity. So we'll see. But
And
these
it's
are all the
not
things. Go ahead.
and it's not just Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
The deep state, the neocons, whatever you want to call them, they might bring up another question
Mm-hmm.
as an excuse for sanctions on China. I guess you could look at the that province of China, where it's mostly Muslim. They
Mm-hmm.
could use that as an excuse. I forgot what it's called. Yeah, so it's just not. Yeah, I think it's Xinjiang. You see, they could come out and say, "Oh, the Chinese are oppressing these people, and we're gonna impose sanctions." So they could pick any excuse really, but right now the big spotlight, of course, is on Taiwan, and it would probably be the that kind of thing that the Americans will focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it might just be the next trigger for whatever the next military confrontation might end up being. And of
Mm.
course, the U.S. made it clear that they will somehow find a way to get involved. So yeah, but yeah, let's keep moving on, man. So we know what's happening out there. We'll find out how things play out in the next couple of months. It's my suspicion, as I mentioned before the end of this year, we're going to know more as to how all the cooperation with the East is taking place. So definitely something worth keeping an eye on. But outside of the figures it was given, I see the University of Michigan sentiment came out, and it's very optimistic despite all the real world horror that's taking place. We got droughts happening in Europe and the UK. We have cost of living going through the roof still. But then Biden said that there's zero inflation.
Well, yeah, he was technically, I guess, right, because the month on month change
Right.
from June to July was zero. But that doesn't take away the fact that on an annual basis, still increased by 8.5%.
Right.
So I think it's a really, really bad form for him to say that, because a lot of people are struggling with higher food prices,
Mm-hmm.
also rent prices. The BLS calculates that rents went up just over 5%. But
Mm-hmm.
if you look at not pictures, sorry, data
Mm-hmm.
from private companies that track rentals in the big metro areas in the
Mm-hmm.
States, it's gone up more like almost 14% in the
Yeah.
last 12 months.
Right.
So he might have been technically right on the month on month because it
Figure.
was a
Right.
0%. Yeah, but
But so just looking at this is a little visual aid of the last what looks like about 4 years. And so even though the most recent figures, as you can see here, is less than the prior two figures, it's look at the overall damage done. Like, the figures are well beyond anything worth celebrating. Just because this little drop or zero or minus of an increase doesn't really indicate the bigger picture, which is people are still suffering and struggling in Main Street. So it's just interesting how they're using that as a positive outlook on top
Yeah.
of the non-farm payrolls from last week, which were a lot beyond expectations. And so it has led some people to suggest that that could be what the Fed needs for a possible pause, or it could trigger a pivot or what. I don't think so, but it's just I'm curious as to why now are all these figures that people are paying attention to so optimistically positive, while the world around us is continue to completely go to
Yeah,
hell in a
I
handbasket.
think it's just a bit of relief by the markets that it actually didn't go higher. It dropped a little bit, and that hadn't happened in a long time. The other thing I would add to the CPI, because the chart you showed is about the changes, percentage
Yeah,
changes. But if you think of the CPI is actually an index,
yeah,
so that index has been going through the roof in the last 18 months,
yeah,
and it hardly ever shrinks. If you look at a long-term chart of CPI index, it's
yeah,
always going up. So even if we go down to 3 or 4% CPI rate,
mhm,
it's still going to be 3 and 4% of a much bigger piece of pie or bigger
right,
number, and people are still going to be worse off.
right.
And the other thing is, average earnings is only going up by about 4.5 or 5%. So people are still losing out.
Right. So adjust, take that number, adjust for inflation, they're still negative. You know what I'm saying? They're still losing. So, well, okay, we got a couple more headlines here. I want to talk about the energy concerns that right here in the U.S. is not mainstream news. A lot of people are probably not paying attention to it just because it's not impacting them directly. But in all the other countries, it's ridiculous. Here, let me share some figures with you that should definitely make you, concern you a little bit. Here is something that came out earlier in the week about Sri Lanka and how their primary energy company has decided to raise the tariffs by up to 264% for the energy users, the people who use the least amount of energy. And so for the people who've used the most amount of energy, their increases have not been nowhere near that. It's like, I want to say, well less than half of that figure there. And so here's just an image of a guy, working on his computer using a battery. It's just it's funny,
Well,
but it's sad because there's a lot of people who are suffering due to their inability to afford these costs. And that's just Sri Lanka. And of course, we all know that they're going through some things. So
here in
very
the
concerning.
UK, it's pretty bad as well. They're predicting £4,000 a year utility bills,
Yeah.
and up until recently, they're forecasting 3,000, and it's up from 2,000 a few months ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just a problem in Sri Lanka. I saw a chart yesterday on Bloomberg,
Yeah.
not on Bloomberg, but from Bloomberg on Twitter. I think it was Javier Blas. He
Mhm.
covers. He works for Bloomberg, and it's a chart of electricity prices in France. It
Mhm.
looks a lot worse than the Sri Lankan price increases.
Yeah. Here's another little article that came out a day or two ago about the UK braces for blackouts as gas cuts and January emergency plan. So just things like this are of concern because, like, if it could happen in the UK, if it happened in Sri Lanka, why can't it happen here in the US at some point in the future? So I think a lot of things that's going on uh, will unfortunately lead to those type of things. So
Well,
energy
and I
definitely.
think in the U.S. as well, this new Inflation Reduction Act is
Mhm.
mostly a Green Agenda Act, and even though the senator from West Virginia, that is a huge coal mining
Mhm.
state, he agreed to sign that deal, that act,
Yeah.
and I think it's going to put the United States, unfortunately, on the same path as Europe,
Mhm.
uh, but just a little delayed, maybe a year or two. So
Right.
it could come to the U.S. in a year or
Right.
two as well. I just wanted to tell you something funny that happened. Not funny, but the thing is, my wife is good at managing and doing the administration for the bills in the house and
Mhm.
everything. So she fixed our a gas and energy prices for 2 years, about 18 months ago.
Mhm.
So just yesterday, I was looking through my bank account. I actually got a refund of almost $300 from British Gas.
Uh-huh.
So while everyone's getting their prices increased,
Yeah.
I got a refund. But I think it's just it's going to get worse though, because once my deal runs out and we try to fix it again, it will probably be a lot higher.
Yeah. Yeah, well, enjoy those savings, my friend. So take those, of course, take those savings, put it into some weight, and hopefully by next year, price of silver is going up, to make up that difference to where
Yeah.
that'll be worthwhile. That'll be good. But so a couple more articles here, then we'll open up and take some questions or whatnot, just to show and highlight
Yeah.
more of what's happening in Main Street. What would you say?
Just want to. Beverly Smith says, Mario, the predicted figures change every week for the UK. And I think Beverly means all the prices for gas and electricity. And she's right.
Yeah.
And it could go, it could be more than 4,000 even by the end of the year. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. It's literally like everything is week to week, month to month in this type of environment. Here's an article here that I thought this came out the same day as Biden's, 0%, due to just the numbers not showing that the index went up. But it says U.S. egg prices surged 47% as food inflation soars, consumers buying chicken over beef, and then it just talks more about how gives some figures as to how Chinese pork prices surge, consumer choosing to buy chicken and cheaper cuts of beef. We got Chinese medium pork inch up, but still down from a year ago. So it just gives more of the food industry.
What the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, is going to do with the CPI basket is if people continue to replace buy chicken instead of beef, they will change the basket. And yeah,
put
they
in
do
an alternative.
An cheaper alternative.
Yes, salami. They go put salami or
yeah, and or bugs.
Yeah, and speaking of which, real quick, we move on from this, but here's another something where it says Beyond Meat cut revenue outlook, trimming workforce by 4%. And so I saw that the Beyond Meat, they attempted to put some of their products inside of some fast food chains. I want to say it's McDonald's, if I'm not mistaken, here in the U.S., and people are not buying that stuff. So they took it off the menu. And it's like, who wants to have whatever that stuff is made up of? I just don't want to touch it my dang self. But that's what's happening, man. This is the real news not being touched on.
I went out earlier today because I had to sign some papers at a shopping center for the car. We're buying a new car, and then I went to have some lunch. So I had a steak, just a steak, and Coke Zero, and that was all I ate.
Yeah,
and the bill came, and it was 45 pounds. Well, it was steak with shrimps, just like, but nothing, no side orders or anything. And I checked the price of the Coke. It was like a big glass of Coke Zero, £4.25. I thought that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I won't be going there again.
Right, and so when you see price figures like that, it discourages you from actually wanting to spend. But it's not. I'm assuming it's just the overhead cost to run an actual business these days. They've gone up to where it's reflected in the bill. And on top of that, we still having shortages of workers on this side to where service is late, food quality is poor. It's just it's a nightmare still. Well into this whole depression, recession. But what else we got? I got a couple more articles here. Let's get to some questions. Let's open up to some questions. I see some back and forth there. So feel free to throw out some questions or ideas or suggestions and things that we can just touch on.
Miss Dr. Malta talks about the IRS here, and I think that's a really interesting topic. Debt, enslavement, IRS, Army, climate farce. I agree with the Dr. Mota or Mota.
Yeah.
And I think the guy from The Big Short, what's his name? He calls himself Cassandra on Twitter.
Yeah, I'll put that up there.
He just showed that. So there you go, if you want to read it.
Yeah, it says IRS more than doubled the number of agents to about 167,000, and there are less than 1,000 billionaires. So it's not for that. There are 32 million small businesses, about half home-based businesses, in the wake of this whole hope, this whole
Yeah.
hoax. And so just think about those figures you put out there, like,
And he goes,
you know,
bingo. That's what it's for, you see.
right,
It's for people like you and I who are self-employed and have a
correct.
small
So
business.
it's the home-based businesses and all the self-employed entrepreneurs that have come about over the last 2 or 3 years. They want to weed out people that they would consider as tax cheats and all that other type of thing. So they want to know every down to the last cent, and
Yeah,
that's what that ramp up is for.
the other signal this gives, this ramping up of IRS agents and cracking down on the public, is that they're desperate that they're going to run out of revenues and the government might not be able to fund itself. A lot of it is to do with the de-dollarization, I would say, less demand for treasuries from abroad.
Yeah. Chris says, do you think the Fed will eventually lose control of interest rates, where the markets will take over and then bring them back to some type of equilibrium? What will this mechanism work? How high do you think rates could go? Man, I'll let you answer that one. That's a loaded question right there.
Uh, well, I think they could temporarily
Mhm,
lose control of the treasury market because that's where interest rates are set.
mhm,
They won't lose control, of course, about of short term rates, the Fed funds target rate,
mhm,
but it is possible they lost control back in March 2020
mhm.
when the 10-year yield, for example, in a matter of days went from 0.3 to 1.3. There was like no bid and offer in the market, no liquidity, but I think it will be temporary. And why?
Mhm,
Well, because they'll come out with more trillions and trillions in QE,
mhm.
just like the Bank of Japan's been doing for decades. But the flip side to that is the dollar will become worth less and less
Yeah,
versus real things, especially gold and silver and other commodities. That's the way I see it. They
right.
can't allow uh, rates to go up like they would in a free market.
Mhm,
U.S. Treasury yields right now, the 10-year yield should be at least 4%, but it's still below 3%. The same thing is happening here with the Bank of England. They're manipulating the gilt yield. I think is around 2%, and our CPI is almost 10%. Doesn't make sense. But the flip side is that our currency here is buying less and less.
mhm.
I bought a Coke Zero in the restaurant for £4.25. That's how it's going to be reflected.
Mm. Yeah, great answer there. Here's Chad says, why are costs for electricity in France going up if they use nuclear power? So are they still using nuclear power, or do they happen to shut it down when they went, got aboard with the whole World Economic
I'm
Forum?
not sure exactly. The don't follow the French energy sector that much. I just saw that the price for electricity has just gone through the roof.
Mhm.
Maybe you can find that tweet from Javier Blas on Twitter.
Let me see here.
I think it
So,
was yesterday, so you might have to scroll up on his.
okay, I will. So just typing in France nuclear power, just this came up here. France risks winter blackouts as nuclear power generation stalls.
Oh,
So
there you go.
so like that is an issue there. So
Yeah.
and then also I did see something else. Let me see. I don't know if I can grab it, but it was
Matthew's asking a question. Thought while you look for that chart, maybe he says thoughts on the Evergrande situation, how the CEO left and selling their headquarters in China. Haven't
okay.
really followed too much Evergrande, but I sent Mike an article from the FT about Chinese, how the Chinese are not buying so much luxury watches. And what's that got to do with Evergrande? Well, that means that the economy there is slowing down.
Mhm.
So I think Evergrande is, yeah, it's weighing heavily on the Chinese economy. I haven't really kept track much with what the CEO did.
Yeah. Let me see. I probably won't be able to find that because I got to go scrambling. But I'll try to figure it out if I can.
That's okay.
So what other questions or thoughts out there? I did see something. Me go
Oh,
back.
Norm says that the nuke plants are cutting back because of river levels. They're getting too low. Yeah, that's true. The Rhine in Germany,
Yeah.
I saw, is like drying up in some stretches, and they can't get the barges through. And I would say probably the rivers in France are drying up too.
Yeah. I did see that one. That was that is not good. Oscar dries up. So here, let me see. Let me grab this. That was wrong article. Let me see. Keep it going. What else we got out here? What is a railway? Any other? Do you have to pay money? Do you have to pay money to ask a question? No. Just feel free to share a thought or ask a question. Highlight at reading a dollar so to stand out.
Hand splash. Why aren't the Chinese buying watches? Well, because the economy is slowed down. They're not being able to do as well as they used to. But
Yeah.
and I think after when the Evergrande problem started last year, a lot of people were trying to get rid of their real estate investments, and they're putting it into expensive Swiss watches. That's how they did it. And the other reason they did it is because uh, it was a way to take their wealth out of China, because there's a limit, I think, of $50,000, or I don't know exactly, to take out of China. So if they bought a really expensive Patek Philippe or something, they could just go through customs or security in the airport, and they wouldn't know how much that watch is worth. But that article is basically saying that it's a sign that the Chinese economy is weakening.
Yeah. Discretionary spending is not as good as it used to
Mm.
be. All that stimulus, especially here in the West, all the stimulus and checks that were handed out, that's long gone. That's why credit cards are through the roof.
Oh yeah,
right now.
yeah. I think it was Cassandra, the guy from Michael Burry. He put a chart up of that as well. It's through the roof, consumer credit in the U.S.
It is bad. So it says, do you feel the BRICS are going to compete with the SDRs, or are they two sides of the same, which thing would be used to impose CBDCs on the masses? Adrian, that's a great question there. To me personally, I think that the CBDCs are already baked into all the monetary policies of all nations, just because the digital yuan is already out there. The Russian ruble version is in testing, and India has their own version they're talking about. So they're still part of the plan for the domestic use amongst their own citizens. But on the international stage, I think whatever will be rolled out to settle trade, that's a whole other ballpark. So there'll be the local financial system, and then the monetary system that will take place using some type of gold medium, more than likely will be out there. So as far as them linking up, I think for example, the SPFF and it's SPFS, which is the Russian banking payment network, along with CHIPS, which is a Chinese version of their network, and India has one. And so all the BRICS have their own networks. They're going to meet up in some interoperable fashion and all that type of stuff. So it's going to be craziness out here, but it just won't be denominated in USD, like that. So
I
anyway,
think the SDRs are just like a basket of mainly Western fiat currencies. So they're not really. I don't think they'll be able to compete with the BRICS, because I think the BRICS want to have a currency backed mainly by gold and maybe some commodities. So the SDR is just like I think John Exter said is the dollar is I owe you nothing, and the SDR is who owes you nothing. It's like no one really knows what an SDR is.
Yeah, here's says, did you guys hear about the rainwater on Earth is contaminated? I actually saw a headline or something like that. Let me just look that up, but it doesn't surprise me one bit, especially when you see chemtrails in the air and whatever goes up must come down. And I'm assuming it has to definitely contaminate the water at some capacity. It's funny we were just talking about that before we live. Contaminated rainwater.
I guess it depends where you are on the planet, but I guess it's difficult. Nowhere really escapes.
Right, and that's where I've seen the chemtrails in lots of countries, like whether where I've gone before throughout the last couple of years, or even just watching travel videos. Like when people are walking around and doing tours, you look up, you see these lines in the sky. I'm like, it's there too.
Well, we won't get too much into it, but it's public information that advanced countries, have been doing weather modification for decades. So
Yeah,
it doesn't surprise me.
right. It is something that's out there. The technology does exist, so it's definitely been used. And I'm assuming that plays into why there's every water's driving up, like that Lake Mead is dang there tapped out. We got all the rivers running low. It's like, oh, okay, where's the water going? Anyway, what else we got out here? Here's a
Matthew,
question.
oh yeah,
Could you survive the financial collapse in you if you invest in gold and silver mining company on the stock market? Great question. Survive the financial collapse. That's a loaded question there. Survive the financial collapse. I don't think surviving this financial collapse. It's more so the readjustment of all financial matters. Like on the
yeah.
other side of this, I'm not sure what type of world we're gonna live in, but I personally, I'm not solely dependent upon the mining space, just because I think if stuff hits the fan, mines will be nationalized to where they'll end up giving you pieces of the pie or nothing at all. So that's where it boils down to. If you don't hold it, you don't own it type of mindset in whatever uncertain world we're heading into. So that's just my 2 cents. What do you think?
Well, back in the 1930s, when there was virtually a financial collapse, a lot of banks went bust, and then they had to do a bank holiday in '33,
Mm-hmm.
and then they confiscated the gold, and then they revalued uh, the gold price versus the currency. Uh, yes, the same thing could happen now. And back then, eventually, companies like Home State Mining did really well during the
Mm-hmm.
1930s. So, if there is a total financial implosion, the fiat currencies will disappear, and the
Mm-hmm.
only money left will be gold and silver. So, yes, there is a danger of nationalization, but if you diversify your investments, you
Mm-hmm.
could do well. But it's very speculative, I would say.
Right.
Mining companies, the best way to survive really is to have physical gold and silver outside the system.
Right.
And I do have mining stocks, but it's not a big chunk of my holdings.
Right. Same here. So I see in the chat there, someone put in some detailed information into the weather situation. So if you guys are interested in finding out more about that, check
Oh
out
yeah,
Round Thoughts. And so I don't even want to put it on the screen just because the algos out here acting funny. Lots of flash floods going on as well. What else we got here? Any other thoughts or ideas? So we got almost halfway through the month of August. What's coming up for the remainder of this month? We know September typically is, very turbulent in reference to the markets, but could we expect the complete opposite? Could we have a melt up in September just because it seems like it'd be just fitting because it don't make sense? But what are you looking forward to? What's coming up the rest of this month?
well, I just saw that the Nasdaq has gone up 23% from its
Mhm.
lows this year,
Yeah.
and that on average in the bear markets of apparently 29 to 32, and also 2000 to 2002, the bear market rallies have averaged 23%.
Mhm.
So yeah, you were right about September and even October, of course, being not good months for the markets. So maybe we could see continued next few weeks. We could see the markets continue to rise, the stock markets, and then
Yeah.
turn south. I don't think we're out of the woods yet
Right.
in the
Right.
markets.
And that's the confusing part because overall things are deteriorating globally speaking, and then here in the U.S. there's pockets of fake light that's being given to us. Inflation is not this, and this is coming down. Everything's turning around, and I'm thinking like, well, still your average consumer is not necessarily reaping the rewards of having more purchasing power in their pockets, and the goods on the shelves are not going down in nominal terms. So it's like, like the average Joe don't own shares of anything real, so it's like they're not benefiting from any of these, these green candles. So it's like we haven't even begun to really start to where this thing is going to end up. So yeah, somebody say August 15th is coming. What's August 15th?
Oh yeah, it's the 51st anniversary of the when Nixon closed the gold window, August 15th, 1971. So it's actually the completion of the 50th year. So some people think there was going to be some kind of jubilee, the 50th year. So who knows what could happen? We've only got 3 days.
Yeah.
August 15th.
And also, I know September is going to be an interesting month because we have the Fed meeting, so we'll find out what they're going to do. Then also, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is meeting the 15th or 16th. And then also in the crypto space, the Ethereum merge is really, really exciting for a lot of people in that space. And on top of whatever else, so those are 3 major events that would definitely be something worth talking about at that time. So. Anything else in September? Anybody out there familiar with? Let us know in the chat.
The end of the baseball season.
I don't watch baseball anyway. So. But we're about 40 minutes, man. I don't see any new questions. Let me see. Here's one. So, with China buying more super oil tankers to transport Russian oil, is the petrodollar on life support now? Yeah, the petrodollar has been on life support, if not already canceled. We just haven't found out about it yet because it's good to say between all the currency swaps and all those memorandums and agreements, they're not denominated in dollar terms. So, as far as energy price and energy in dollar terms, it already could be canceled when it comes to those countries. So it's just the U.S. still using that metric because that's all we know. So
it's interesting he mentions super tankers because Taiwan comes into the equation here because it's so strategically positioned there in the South China Sea, where those super tankers are gonna cruise through, and so that's why I think, we could still have some kind of conflict over Taiwan.
Right. People sort of. I'll try to do one if I can. All right, let's get ready to dial down.
Someone said baseball goes on to October and November. Yeah, the regular season though ends in September. That's what I meant.
Yeah, I'm just not a baseball guy, man. It's too boring for me, man. It's hard to sit down there, and especially in the heat. I will go to some Tiger games, but it's torture to me, man.
Well, I remember when I lived in Florida, a friend of my dad, we used to go to the minor leagues, and I used to go with him and his wife, and she would be knitting during the game.
There's something to do. All right, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Of course, we'll be back at it next week. There'll be more stuff to talk about, but more importantly, take advantage of this weekend. Enjoy your time with family and friends, and you realize what's happening all around the world. And so we can use these as real-world examples on how we can use all that information to better prepare in whatever form we can. And so just here's a last little something I want to mention that I didn't. But right now in Germany, I'm sure I showed it to you, Mario, but right now in Germany, you Google search firewood, it's off the chart just because energy is so costly over there. And so people are literally finding alternative ways to try to heat their homes in preparation for this winter. So we can learn from all this. So,
just put the firewood in the chimney and turn.
Right, the way it used to be, the way it used to happen, 100 plus years ago when people heat up their
house.
Not
even 100 years. When I lived in Switzerland, we had heating and everything, but we also had a fireplace. You could put firewood in there and turn the fireplace on. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like here in the U.S., a lot of homes are not made with that. They're here, but they're not made that way no more. And so anyway, but you get my point. Take advantage of all this information. Use it, process it, use it for your benefit to help you out. Because it's good to say that it's going to come your way at some point. So that's my thought process. But anyway, Mario, enjoy your weekend. Any last words of wisdom you want to leave us with, or anything?
Well, you were saying before we started out that there's so much wild news and like fears out there, and there is. I notice here, all you hear in the press is blackouts, maybe the drought, the climate change. I would say to people to try to ignore a lot of it and just like keep plugging away and keep your head down, and
Yeah.
don't let it scare you. And like Mike said, go out and enjoy yourself.
Right. Right. That's my objective. So, and Dwayne Clark says, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. I like that one, man. And so we'll part on those wise words there. But everybody, be blessed, be safe, enjoy your weekend, and we'll be back at it next week. And of course, always, if you have not, encourage a friend somehow, some way. Invite a friend, Manico64, Rethinking a Dollar throughout the week so they can stay plugged in and informed. So be blessed, be safe. See you guys later. Peace.